Years ago, late one Friday night, my mom was very sick and was exhibiting pneumonia symptoms, so she left to go to the ER and get checked out. It's just us two at home, so I was alone. I was on FaceTime with my friend for about an hour when my mom called me. She was calling to tell me the doctors confirmed she had pneumonia and they were going to keep her in the hospital overnight. Being alone for the night was fine by me. I ate a bunch of ice cream and rewatched the second Terminator. I must have dozed off on the couch because the next thing I remember was waking up and seeing the clock read 1:42 in the morning. I still remember that exact time. I'm a very light sleeper, so I wasn't at all surprised that I had woken up. I took the opportunity to go downstairs and take a shower before going to bed. While I was showering, I kept freaking myself out thinking I was hearing noises from upstairs. My bedroom is in the basement, for the record, and directly below the kitchen. Over the sound of the shower running, I kept thinking I was hearing movement up there. I knew I was just being paranoid, so I forced myself to take my time finishing up my shower and drying off. Right when I finished drying off, a very audible thud from directly above me actually made me jump. It was way too loud and powerful to just ignore. I tried to think rationally. Maybe my mom had been released early. I grabbed my phone off the sink to call her, but I didn't have any service. I get horrible service, or sometimes no service at all in my basement, and this was one of those times. The sounds were only getting louder. I kept hearing this one specific sound that sounded like heavy objects, maybe furniture, being dragged around. I must have tried calling my mom about a dozen times, but each time I did, I would get that beeping sound you get when you have no service after the first ring. I had to go up there and make sure it was my mom. I looked around the basement for anything I could use as a weapon if it came to that, and found a foot-long steel pipe in the laundry room that looked like it could do sufficient damage if needed. Then I crept up the stairs to the basement door. Of course, I put my ear against it before opening it. I was praying that all of this paranoia would turn out to be over nothing. I couldn't have been more wrong. The noises continued before I heard shuffling towards the basement door. Then everything went eerily quiet. I was straining to listen for the slightest sound, but if there was any, I probably wouldn't have been able to hear them over the sound of my own heartbeat. Then I froze up as the door handle slowly began to turn. I guess I had locked it earlier, before falling asleep, because the person on the other side wasn't able to open it. Upon realizing this, they began jiggling the handle very aggressively. That was followed by several loud thuds on the door. I could hear the sound of several men speaking to each other in some foreign language. I think it was Russian, but I'm not sure. The reality of the situation had fully set in, and I had tears in my eyes as I felt like my life was about to end. The pounding on the door was so loud I thought for sure they were going to break it down. I considered maybe saying something, like the police were on their way, or bluffing that I had a gun, but even the thought of doing so and thus making my presence known made me nauseous. I don't know how long I stood there against the door listening to the intruders fiddling with it and attempting to break in. It could have been anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes, but felt like hours. And I don't know why, and I still don't, but for some reason, they stopped. All sounds from the other side ceased, and thinking back, I don't even remember hearing footsteps walk away. But after waiting 5 minutes and hearing no new sounds, I went back down the stairs to hide in my room. I locked the door to my bedroom as well, sat on the bed with the steel pipe, and cried for quite some time. I stayed awake for hours, but somehow managed to fall asleep at some point, because I remember waking up seeing it was morning, and hearing my mom screaming upstairs. I ran upstairs, still holding the steel pipe, and found our house clearly having been rummaged through. All the furniture was moved around, and anything worth even the slightest value had been taken. The police, of course, came out and we filed a report. I told them what happened, but obviously since I hadn't seen any of the intruders, I don't know how much it helped. It was determined that they entered through the front door, which my mom had simply forgotten to lock when she left for the ER. This incident really shed some light on how prone our household was to something like this happening. Needless to say, after that day, I never stayed home alone again. I was always either at a friend's house or after-school program until my mom came home, and to this day, I still feel unsafe being home alone. This happened one night I was home alone with my dog. My dog Bear is an Akita, a breed known to be aggressive. Bear barks and growls anytime someone is outside the house. Close to midnight, I was watching TV in the living room when I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside and shutting its engine off. Right away, Bear ran to the door and began to bark. I told him to shut up, as obviously it was just a neighbor. Bear jumped on the sofa and onto the window to look outside. He was screwing the blinds up, and I was worried he'd tear them, because he's done it before, so I got up to push him off the sofa and fix the blinds. As I did this, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked on the curb by my house. I couldn't make out any details, but I could see the driver sitting in the car, and it looked like he was staring at my house. I didn't think anything of it. I got a drink and continued to watch TV. Quite a while had passed since I looked out the window, but I'm not sure how long. If I had to guess, it was about 20 or 30 minutes. Out of nowhere, Bear ran to the door and began barking like crazy. I was about to yell at him to be quiet again when I thought I heard a tapping at the door. It wasn't a knock, rather much lighter and very quiet. It almost didn't sound deliberate. I paused the TV when the same tapping started on the window. Bear was going nuts, running to and from the window, snarling and barking. I knelt down to peek through the blinds and saw a man. He immediately went from the window to the door and started softly tapping it again. I got an awful feeling. The way he wasn't knocking, just tapping, and the fact he was doing it on the window as well gave me a bad feeling. No way I was opening the front door, so I picked up Bear and went upstairs to the window directly above the front door to open it and ask him what he wanted. I felt a lot safer doing this. He looked up at me all startled-like and said in a low voice, almost barely audible, "I have the pizza you ordered." I told him I didn't order a pizza. Believe it or not, I actually felt better now. He seemed normal enough, and I assumed he had the wrong address, and was maybe tapping and speaking quietly so as not to disturb the neighbors. It was past midnight after all. I was trying to hush Bear as he kept barking and growling during this whole exchange, when the man firmly responded that he had the right address, and that I better come downstairs and pay for the food. I told him again that I was positive I didn't order any food, and he replied again in a firm tone that someone has to pay him for the pizza, and that I might as well just take it because it was getting cold. That didn't make a lot of sense at all. What's more, it for some reason took me this long to realize this dude wasn't carrying a pizza, nor did he have any kind of uniform on. I told him again that he had the wrong address, and he got this very angry expression all of a sudden. He kept demanding that I open the door, sounding really frustrated. Then he switched his tone back to overly politely persuading me to come downstairs. I asked him where the pizza was, and he said he had it, almost brushing me off. It was really dark, but there was definitely no food in his hands or anywhere around him. My dog was completely tripping at this point, and the stranger had turned into a broken record as he kept repeating, "Come downstairs," or "Open the door." All this noise must have alerted my neighbor, who happened to open his front door and start walking out. The stranger didn't say a word, he just turned around and walked to his car empty-handed. It was the same car that had been parked outside earlier. I explained to my neighbor what happened as the guy drove off, and he asked if I wanted to call the cops. I didn't think it was worth it since I wouldn't be able to provide much detail about the man or his car, so I said no. Not sure what he wanted, but he clearly wasn't a very smart man to think that I would fall for his delivery driver act. It was the middle of summer, and my parents had left for the weekend to go to our house in Cape Cod. It's about a 2-hour drive away, so it's no big deal for them to leave me alone for a few days. My mom had made some pulled pork and pasta for me to heat up whenever, and they left me money in case I wanted to order food. Things were all good. The first night I was staying up late playing Battlefield 1 when I decided to have my girl come over. My parents were against having anyone over while I was alone, but I didn't care because I knew they wouldn't find out. My girlfriend Lauren came over and we hung out on the couch in the living room and watched a scary movie. At some point, she got up to use the bathroom and came back looking concerned. I asked her what was wrong and she said she thought she saw someone rummaging through the backyard shed. This freaked me out a little. I asked her if she was sure she saw someone, but she said it was really dark. Nonetheless, I went outside to take a look. The backyard was clear, and so was the shed. I told her this and we got back to watching the movie, but she kept getting paranoid, so I eventually agreed to go upstairs. Lauren left about an hour later, and I continued watching movies in the living room until around 3 a.m. Then I called it a night. I slept until noon the next morning. The day went uneventfully. I went out with some friends and then spent the rest of the day playing either Fortnite, Battlefield, or GTA. Once it was dark out, I invited Lauren over again. We made dinner and watched movies on the couch again, and at some point it started raining heavily. I got up to get water from the fridge, and just happened to glance through the sliding glass door and noticed the shed door was open and blowing in the wind. Was it cause for alarm? Not at all. It's blown open plenty of times before during storms, as it's a very old shed. So, like I had done a million times before, I threw on a coat and went outside to shut and latch it properly. When I came back inside, Lauren was using the bathroom. One thing I picked up on, though, was a bunch of mud had been kicked all over the carpet. I hadn't noticed it before. That annoyed me because I assumed Lauren had tracked it inside, and I'd have to clean it up before my parents came home the next day. Well, that sounded like a problem for tomorrow. After the movie ended, we went up to my room and hung out there for a little. By the time she left, it was 11:30, and I climbed back into bed after walking her out. I fell asleep. I awoke a few moments later to the sound of the rain coming down very heavily now, and I could even hear thunder in the distance. But I also heard another sound. It was undeniably the sound of water dripping onto the carpeted floor from somewhere in my room. Was there a leak in the ceiling? No way. I laid motionless in bed, continuing to listen. The multiple water drops hitting the carpet continued for quite some time, when I heard another sound that made my whole body shudder with fear. It was someone exhaling very deeply. I shot up in bed and screamed. There was a figure standing over the foot of my bed. I dove out of bed and switched the lamp on. There was some random man in my room, soaking wet and covered in mud. His clothes were all old and drenched, and he had a beard and long hair. He took a few steps back and started calmly motioning for me to calm down with his hands, while staring at me with his wide, bloodshot eyes. He He was no doubt on something. I picked up the lamp and threw it at him, and he ran out of the room. I ran after him and jumped down the stairs attempting to tackle him, but he evaded me and ran out the front door. I chased him out into the street, but it was so dark and rainy out there I soon lost him. The first thing I did was run back inside and call the cops, and they dispatched a few officers to my address. Then I called my parents, who were still awake, and they wanted to wait until morning to head back because of the poor weather conditions. I was pissed about that, sure, but I couldn't really blame them. I sure as hell wasn't spending the rest of the night in that house alone though, so I slept at my neighbor's. The police's investigation basically yielded squat. They couldn't find any evidence he forced his way in, but it turned out the mud I saw in the kitchen was from him, so he clearly entered the house through the sliding door when I went outside to shut the shed door. As far as I know, they never found him. I have no idea how dangerous he was, but he was clearly homeless and on drugs. What creeps me out is thinking about how long he was in my room, standing over my bed, just watching me.